So originally I was going to make a video talking about the Dallas Mavericks and how it continues to get worse out there. Now apparently they're going to forfeit games because there's not enough available personnel to play these games. But then news broke out in Philly about how Paul George is going to be sidelined for the rest of the season. And you already know, boy, it's a hoot to talk about PG. But then before I got to that, there was more news being broken out in Phoenix. Apparently Coach Budenholzer and Kevin Durant not seeing eye to eye, and everything is just falling flat apart over there. But then even more news broke out in New Orleans about how Trey Murphy is now a part of a very, very long list of players who are unavailable because now he's sidelined for the rest of the season. And instead of me trying to sit here and filibuster you for an 8-minute video so I can make ads, I decided to just make it all one big old video and give you the 4 biggest disappointments in this NBA season. And boy, do we have a lot. And I'm actually going to put them in order. I'm going to step up to the plate and be a real man. I'm not going to punk out. Coming in at number 4, we have the New Orleans Pelicans. So New Orleans was fairly optimistic on who they were going to be in a very competitive Western Conference, in large part due to the addition of the point guard that they desperately needed in DeJounte Murray over the offseason, the improvement of both Herb Jones and Trey Murphy in previous years that kind of put them in a position to where they seemed as if like a very interesting duo on the perimeter, or at least surrounding pieces around Zion, and more importantly, with Zion coming off of the healthiest season that we've seen out of him in his entire career, it definitely seemed as if like New Orleans was on the up and up. Now, to be fair, everything wasn't perfect, of course. This team was incomplete because they went into the season without a starting 5, and there was still the very awkward conversation to have about Brandon Ingram, the contract extension, and if he wasn't going to stay, then what exactly could we see from this team in return? But still, nevertheless, it felt as if like the Pelicans were going to finish the season around 45 wins and on a really good stretch, potentially hit the 50-win mark. But no, they're not even anywhere near close to that. Right now, as I record this video, the Pelicans are all the way at the bottom of the conference, all the way at the bottom. With a record of 19-51, that not only means that the Pelicans are the second worst team in the Western Conference, but this is the second worst season that we've seen in franchise history, which again is something that no one really expected. Now, of course, the biggest contributing factor to all of this were the endless amount of injuries that this franchise suffered all season long. Game 1 of the season, DeJounte Murray dealt with a fractured hand, and not too long after that, CJ McCollum was sidelined for about a month of basketball. Following after that, Zion was also sidelined for a good portion of the regular season as well, dealing with a hamstring injury. Later on in the season, Herb Jones was sidelined for the rest of the year, dealing with a shoulder injury. And the news that just recently broke is that Trey Murphy will be sidelined for the rest of the season as well, dealing with a torn labrum. And unfortunately, it doesn't stop there because there's like 3 other reasons to why this season has been a complete and utter failure. The first being Zion. Even though, yes, Zion has played recently and he has been amazing, and we talked about that in a more recent video, it is, to me, completely disappointing that potentially Zion is only being motivated to play at this level is due to the fact that he's going to lose a substantial amount of money if he does not play, if he's not available for half of the season, which is something that you don't want to see out of someone that is supposed to be your franchise player. And of course, there were constant conversations, and I do believe there will continue to be constant conversations surrounding if he's even going to stay on this roster after the summer, especially if the Pelicans can land a top pick and potentially go after Cooper Flagg. Then you have the whole Brandon Ingram situation, BI, the awkward fit, the awkward conversation on what exactly he deserves out in New Orleans did not really go well. And unfortunately, the Pelicans lost all leverage in any negotiation conversations they had with any other franchise. And so in return, for a player that was the best piece during the Anthony Davis trade a handful of years ago, the only thing that the Pelicans received in return was Bruce Brown, who was on an expiring contract, and Kelly Olynyk, who only has 1 more year left on his deal. That's not really much, but in my opinion, the biggest stain has to be DeJounte Murray. The whole Murray experiment out in New Orleans has been a complete and utter disaster. Like I stated before, brought into this season to be the starting point guard that this team has been looking for desperately over the past handful of years now. And unfortunately, due to him fracturing his hand, that of course slowed down that progress. But as soon as he came back 2 months later, he suffered a torn Achilles, which not only is going to keep him sidelined for the rest of the season, but who he will be moving forward is really up in the air. He wasn't even playing that great when he was on the floor, and I highly doubt that he'll be able to get back to the level in which we saw out of him anytime soon, if ever. To make matters worse, what the Pelicans gave up to get Murray out of Atlanta seems even more hefty of a price point, not just because of the poor play and the career-altering injury that we saw from Murray, but also Dyson Daniels has quickly become one of the the most impressive and intriguing defensive prospects that we've seen at the guard position in quite some time. And on top of the fact that they gave up Larry Nance, who's a quality rotation player in the right situation. And then on top of that, they added 2 other draft picks, one of which was the last Laker pick from the Anthony Davis trade. That's a yikes for me, dog. A big old yikes. And we're only at number 4. Coming at number 3, we have the Phoenix Suns. I know. Crazy, right? Any normal circumstance, the Suns would easily be number 1, but hey, that's the type of season that we have in our hands. Nevertheless, heading into this season, the Suns were projected to be around a 50-win team, make the playoffs, but worst case scenario, make the play-in just because how competitive the Western Conference was. Huge reason for this is because this is a team that had a lot of name value behind it, KD, Booker, Beal, and they needed to make some slight improvements around the margins, in particular bring in a point guard, which is what they did, and also replace their head coach in Frank Vogel and bring in head coach Mike Budenholzer, who can better organize the offense in theory, maximize the true identity of this team while still keeping a lot of those defensive intangibles that Vogel had instilled with them over the past handful of seasons. However, what if I told you that here we are, end of March, and this team is not even in a play-in? That's how bad this season has been. As I record this video, the Phoenix Suns have a record of 33-37. Quick sidebar, that means that this is the worst record or worst win percentage since the 2020 season. Before the ascension of the Suns, before they added Chris Paul, made the finals. Before all that, this is the worst season that we've seen since then. Crazy. An offensive rating around 117 and a defensive rating of 118, which means that offensively, despite all the additions, despite the adjustments, despite having Yusuf Nurkic out there shooting threes, and no matter what they did, the offense is quite literally the same that it was last year. However, the defense is noticeably worse. Shout out to Tyus Jones. He's a really good backup point guard, and that's what he is, a backup point guard. Putting him to the starting lineup was not going to change anything. Yusuf Nurkic turning him into a three-point shooter or having him roam around the perimeter a little bit more offensively certainly was not going to get the most out of him. He's always been a bad roller to the basket. But the biggest problem with the Suns was the same thing that we saw last year happening this year, and that is you put so much money and effort towards 3 players who don't really complement each other that well because they all play very similar style of basketball. Getting busy in the mid-range, sprinkle a little bit of three-point shooting, but none of them still get to the basket. So trying to shift and alter the defense to get open looks for everyone else doesn't happen as often as other great offenses in the NBA. So you are always going to be lagging behind in that department and effectively putting a cap on what should be your highest premium. Also, it does not matter if you fire a head coach and bring in someone else, despite the fact that effectively there are now rumors saying that y'all are about to do that again. The Suns are going to do that again. That's crazy. But hey, that might be the only thing that you can do because as we all know, during the trading deadline, they attempted to move off of Bradley Beal because of the amount of money that he's getting paid in contrast to the contribution that he has on his team, which completely outweighs one another. I mean, Beal is getting paid $50+ million to be a third option on a team that, again, he doesn't truly complement. It's crazy. But unfortunately, it's not that simple. Bradley Beal infamously has the worst contract in the NBA, in my opinion, and that's not just because of the amount of money he's getting paid, but because he has a no trade clause, which basically means that it's impossible to move Bradley Beal. Beal is not going to want to be moved anywhere in the NBA unless he approves for it, but any team that he's approving for doesn't want him on their roster, not only because they don't want to have to deal with someone with a no trade clause, but they also don't want to have to pay him $50+ million to be effectively a third option on a team that will immediately have a ceiling to what they can and cannot do. And so once that became a reality, the Phoenix Suns immediately pivoted into what they believe to be the next best option, and that was, we should start trading Kevin Durant without letting anyone know that we're attempting to trade him. News broke that they were trying to trade KD. He effectively declined it because he wanted to, see the rest of the season out. But more importantly, Durant has a lot of leverage in what team he wants to go to because he only has 1 year left on his deal. So the only way he's going to sign an extension is if he goes to a team that he wants to go to. So then that fell through. And so now you have a disgruntled Bradley Beal, a disgruntled Kevin Durant, and now a lot of that disgruntled issues is being taken out on the coach because now we see KD and Mike Budenholzer going back and forth with one another. You can literally see the frustration all over their faces. And oh yes, let me not, forget to remind you, this team does not have any of their draft picks for the foreseeable future. They traded a lot of them away to go get Kevin Durant a couple of years ago, and literally during the offseason, you had the Brooklyn Nets and the Houston Rockets playing with the Phoenix Suns' future, just trading draft picks back and forth with one another. It was actually kind of crazy. So effectively, everyone is now anticipating this team to blow it up because that's inevitable at this point. Coming in at number 2, and this is very, very difficult, I have the Dallas Mavericks. As crazy as it sounds, yes, I think there's a team out there that's having a worse season than Dallas. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this part of the video because we already know what happened with Dallas. For whatever reason, Nico Harrison, who was supposed to be helping the team from a general manager perspective, decided to trade away their future in Luka Doncic, the 25-year-old superstar that had a 7-year window to win this team a championship after just leading them to the finals. For whatever reason, decided, hey man, you're either too fat, you don't play defense, and we just don't want to commit to anything that you're providing to us. So we're going to just trade you to the Lakers and return receive Anthony Davis, Max Christie, and 1 first-round pick. And since then, it's been downhill from there. It's quite literally been some of the worst injury luck I have ever seen in my entire life. Literally, Anthony Davis' debut, he suffered a strained abductor, having him sidelined indefinitely. Not too long after that, Daniel Gafford suffered a sprained MCL, so he's sidelined indefinitely. Derek Lively was already out potentially for the rest of the regular season anyway, dealing with an ankle stress fracture. And then Kyrie Irving, just a handful of games after AD's debut, tore his ACL, and he's not only out for the rest of the season, but is projected to be out potentially for a whole calendar year. That is a lot. And somehow it just continues to get worse. Those names that I just listed off were just some of the main pieces out in Dallas that are missing significant time, potentially going to be out for the remainder of the season. But this team has been dealing with injuries all season long, especially post the Luka Doncic trade. And it's gotten so bad that the Mavericks are missing so many players that there is a likelihood that they might have to start forfeiting games because they do not have enough available pieces. Now, a lot of people have been asking how exactly is this possible? Well, it's because of new rules set in the CBA. There's only a certain amount of players that they can bring up, especially with the amount of money that they spent. This team has already exhausted all of their two-way contracts and roster spots, so they don't really have that much wiggle room. But we're literally seeing shoot-arounds before the game, and there's only like 8 to 9 players out there shooting around for the Mavericks. It's kind of scary. It's actually gotten so bad that the Mavericks might actually rush Anthony Davis to come back for the season just so they don't have to forfeit games. He's actually right now been upgraded to play for the G League for the Dallas Mavericks just so he can be available so they can put him on the roster. He may not even play, but they just need enough bodies to fill out on their roster so they don't have to forfeit games. That is crazy. That's really, really bad. And yet it still somehow gets worse. The more digging I did into this team, the more I realized this brother, in the attempt to build a team around Luka Doncic, he traded away so many draft picks in the upcoming years that if they don't maximize this next 2 to 3 years, they're going to miss out on draft capital. 2027 pick gone to Charlotte due to the PJ Washington trade. 2028 pick swap gone to OKC. 2029 pick gone to the Brooklyn Nets due to the Kyrie Irving trade. And 2030 pick swap gone to the San Antonio Spurs thanks to the Grant Williams trade. And if that wasn't enough, Nico Harrison at the deadline, because he knew he had to pay Quentin Grimes at the end of the summer, he decided to trade Grimes to the Philadelphia 76ers for Caleb Martin. And Quentin Grimes is out there having a ball. He's hooping. Since Quentin Grimes has been in Philadelphia, he's averaging 22 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, a steal and a half, shooting splits of 51, 40, 72, and he's doing this in 33 minutes of action. But oh, don't you worry, it still gets worse because Quentin Grimes, he's improving. The last 10 games are basically in the month of March. Grimes is averaging 28 and a half points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 steals, and shooting splits of 53, 41, 71. And in this sample size of games, he had 44 points against the Golden State Warriors, 30 points against the Minnesota Timberwolves, 25 points against the Utah Jazz, 35 points against the Atlanta Hawks, 29 points against the Toronto Raptors, 28 points against his old team, the Dallas Mavericks, and then a career high 46 points, 13 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steal game against the Houston Rockets, where he shot 55% from the field, 57% from behind the arc, and then followed followed that up with a 28-point performance and 5 assists against the Oklahoma City Thunder. They traded that for Caleb Martin because they didn't want to pay him, even though they already moved off of Luka because they didn't want to pay him, but they still didn't have enough money to pay Quentin Grimes. I don't know. Nico, I don't know how you're still walking around. I just don't get it. I truly don't get it. But yet somehow, some way, it gets worse. The number one team, the team that's had the biggest disappointment in the NBA, I think it's the Philadelphia 76ers. This is disastrous at a monumental level. And the reason why I say that is because I think all of the teams that I named before, they can somewhat get out of the situation that they're in. The Pelicans, if need be, if they get desperate enough, they can trade Zion. The Suns, I think they're going to trade KD and eventually trade Devin Booker anyway. And if you're the Dallas Mavericks, push come to shove, you can trade Anthony Davis and get back what you can in return. I don't know what Philly does because outside of trading Tyrese Maxey, which I don't even think there's going to be that much of a market out there for him with the amount of money he's getting paid, there's nothing that you're going to get back for any of these players. And I do believe that Paul George and Joel Embiid are on two of the worst 3 contracts in the NBA. So heading into this season, the Sixers were projecting and expecting to have a really big year, in large part because they had to, due to the commitments they made in the offseason by signing not only Maxey, not only Embiid, but also Paul George, all to either max or near max contracts. They front-loaded this team. And the reason why they were even in this predicament is because in the offseason before, Daryl Morey decided to not give James Harden the contract he was looking for, which effectively, tore that whole relationship apart, that eventually sent Daryl Morey packing James Harden to the Los Angeles Clippers, receiving little to nothing in return, just a bunch of role players, which then wasted effectively all of last year, but was going to free up so much cap in the offseason that, again, they can swing big on a free agent, and that free agent just so happened to be Paul George. Now, that sounds crazy because this is an organization that also could have went after other players. It is amazing to me to this day how many teams looked at Zach LaVine and told themselves, no, I'd rather have Paul George. That's crazy. But hey, here we are. They went out there and got Paul George, added him to the roster. For whatever reason, PG has not yet learned to shut up. We don't need to know all your negotiation tactics. I don't need to know the backstory between how you talked with the owner and all that, how you got your money. I don't need to know that. I don't need to know how you and Embiid are going to perform on the floor, how y'all going to be the most talented. I don't need to know that. Because, brother, you keep setting yourself up for failure every single year. I don't need to hear it. But PG do what PG do. So he's running his mouth, talking about how much he needs to get paid, what he thought he was worth. Hey, Kawhi Leonard got XYZ, so give me that as well as a no trade clause. Crazy. Saying all that with his chest, got to the team, expected to be a third option, woefully underperformed. To make matters worse, before the season even began, we knew we weren't even going to get the best version of Joel Embiid because not only was he still dealing with the injury all throughout the offseason, sidebar, don't know why you went out there in the Olympics to play if you were not 100% healthy. But later found out that Embiid is still dealing with knee problems. So much so that this team is already projecting that not only was he not going to play back-to-backs in this season, but the foreseeable future, he will never play in any back-to-back games. It got so bad this season that even during times in which Embiid wasn't playing basketball, he was still dealing with inflammation in his knee and eventually was forced to just shut it down in the middle of the season after playing a whopping 19 games. I had to double check that. I thought he got to the 20 game mark, but no, only 19. To make matters worse, Tyrese Maxey, he dealt with injuries early on this season, and even though a lot of people been critical of Maxey, I'm going to put things into his proper context. 26, 6, and 3 with nearly 2 steals. Shooting splits aren't the greatest, but the reason why they're not the greatest and the reason why his impact wasn't like it was last year is because this team was asking way too much out of Maxey. Tyrese Maxey is not a number 1. He still has a long way to go in terms of ball handling, creating advantages for himself and everyone else. Like all that passing and playmaking that go along with the scoring and being the number 1 option, he ain't there yet. but he was asked to be that because you have two other players on the roster who are not even available to play, and when both of them are playing, it looks bad. But wait, it gets worse, because one of the brighter spots throughout this entire season, or at least early on, was their rookie in Jared McCain. Jared came out playing amazing basketball, actually playing better basketball than Paul George. Started out the season averaging 15 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists, shooting splits of 46, 38, and 87.5, and did so in limited minutes, only 25 minutes a game. McCain was actually looking really, really good. But unfortunately, top of January, had a meniscus injury. Now he was out for the rest of the season, which then put even more pressure on Tyrese Maxey and eventually put more pressure on Paul George once he came back and he was playing a little bit more games. And somehow, PG is playing so bad, he's worse than Tobias Harris, which is a crazy bar that you can't even pass. You're not even better than Tobias. That is the lowest of the lows. That's a bar that everyone assumed that you would easily be able to clear. But you can't even play better than Tobias Harris once you got back. And then even when you got back, you played so bad that not only did you have to cancel your podcast because how much slander you was getting in the comment section, but also because you were not 100% healthy yourself, and now you're sidelined for the rest of the season as well. Be very mindful that this ain't even talking about Eric Gordon being out for the rest of the season dealing with a wrist injury, Kyle Lowry being day-to-day, Kelly Oubre being day-to-day, Lonnie Walker being day-to-day, Andre Drummond being day-to-day. Like, half of the roster is dealing with on and off injuries all season long. But the fact that I even named some of those players as reliable figures on this roster should let you know what time it is. The Sixers are in a miserable position, and yet it continues to get worse. Bro, the Sixers, they just gave Joel Embiid a contract extension. They just gave Paul George a contract extension. Both of them are getting paid all the way through the 2028 and 2029 season. And both of them are making over $55 million at one point of their contracts. That's how crazy it is. And to me, the cherry on top is that all of this could have been avoidable. Why the Sixers decided to rush out there and hand the contract that they gave to Joel Embiid is beyond me. Hell, you got the Mavericks being more cautious, the Clippers being more cautious than you all. And yet here you are handing over a super max extension to Joel Embiid. How is it possible? You are an organization and you decided to go after Bradley Beal and Paul George before Zach LaVine when the Bulls were begging someone to take him. Beyond me. And on top of that, you gave PG exactly what he was looking for, despite the fact that no one was willing to give him that. Daryl Morey coming out and speaking with such confidence about using AI, knowing the shit show that he's running out in Philly, to me is outrageous. That to me is crazy. And for the last week now, everybody is tossing the blame pie around one another. Also crazy. Because there's no way we're not going to sit here and not blame you and that owner for making the decision of giving Embiid this contract and Paul George the one that he has. It's bad in Philly, and I don't think there is any real answer out of it because no one in the NBA wants Joel Embiid or Paul George because it's only going to get worse as time progresses. But hey, that's the video. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about the biggest disappointment so far this season. Maybe I got them out of order, or maybe I forgot a team. So let me know in the comment section below. Hit the subscribe button, notification bell, and until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.